Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with another APUSH video. Today we're taking a look at topic 6.13, focusing in on Gilded Age politics. Now, there's going to be a lot going on in these series of videos. The main thing is trying to keep in mind the major trends of what's happening politically. Specific figures, maybe not as important, but make sure that you are aware of the major themes that are going to be defining this period of politics in the late 19th century. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and, kind of talk about how politics was defining America at this time. And as you can see here on this slide, it's, the idea of the politics of equilibrium. As you can see here, the Civil War is still going to be having an impact on how Americans are going to be aligning politically. You can still see that old slave, non-slave state kind of separation there. And as you can see there, Republicans are going to be dominating the North, and Democrats are going to be dominating the South. Now, there's going to be a little bit more, nuance to this, of course, but that is still going to be something that is going to be significant during this time period. And it's also going to be a time period where, when we do talk about who's controlling government at the federal level, you're talking about a period of time where overwhelmingly the Republicans will be controlling the White House and overwhelmingly the Democrats will be controlling Congress. So, keeping that in mind, let's kind of get into, how politics are really going to be balanced during this time period. There's going to be extremely competitive elections for President of the United States and other major offices. Today we can kind of relate to that a little bit, at least with presidential elections. We've had a series of pretty competitive elections the last several cycles, and in the late 1800s we saw a lot of that as well. Now, part of that is the tendency in that time period to be very loyal to one's party. Now, granted, a lot of this is tied in with machine politics that's going to be found in urban areas. A lot of it is going to be based on the reality that political parties in those days were responsible for providing a lot of important basic services, such as the fire departments, police protection, water treatment. All that stuff was initially provided by the parties and then eventually by the governments. So there was a lot of sense of party loyalty. And so, there was generally a sense of either you are a Republican or you're a Democrat. The candidates were almost irrelevant. It was just, it's kind of like, well, to some degree today we have a lot of folks that are like that, but also you could say that it's similar to what you would maybe see with support for, sports teams and things like that. If somebody's a Bengals fan or a Steelers fan or something along those lines. Something else that's going to be defining this time period, as you can see here in the late 1800s, this is going to be the highest rates of voter turnout in American history, still to this day. And you can see here, you're talking about, voter turnout in presidential election years of over 3/4% of the eligible voting population. Now, granted, there's some things that are actually going to skew this data a little bit. Obviously, in the South, African Americans did not, in reality, have the right to vote. In the nation as a whole, except for some, exceptions out west, women did not have the right to vote. So you can see here that it's a very, very small population that actually could vote. But of that population of men, particularly white men, they did come out in pretty large numbers. You can kind of see here, as you're looking into the 20th century, why are voting rates going down? A lot of it is going to be tied to women being eligible to vote, but not quite having the social acceptance of actually voting. So in other words, the percentage is going to be dropping because more will be eligible, though women are not going to overnight come out and vote in large numbers. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into defining how these two political parties are going to be lining up in terms of their base of support. So if we're talking about on the Democrat side, one of the important groups for sure is the fact that this is going to be the party of the South. This is obviously defined before and during the Civil War, and it doesn't change at all during this time period. People are going to be very loyal to the Democrat Party. Why? Because their daddy was a Democrat, or their granddaddy was a Democrat. Going all the way back to supporting Andrew Jackson. And these were folks that, were white guys. Many of these guys are going to have some ties to the Ku Klux Klan, and, so it's that old Southern, kind of mindset that certainly believed in white superiority. That's going to be a major block of the Democratic Party still through this time period. In fact, the Democrats are going to own the South pretty much lock, stock, and barrel until the 1960s. So you're talking about a century of pretty much owning one region of the country. That's the power of the Democrats in the South. Now, being said, though, it is going to be an interesting coalition of Southern whites teaming up with urbanites in the North. So you had, big cities like Boston and New York and Philly teaming up with deep South rural areas. And if you're factoring in the urban component of it, that's going to include a lot of recent immigrants. The Democratic Party, especially, Tammany Hall, the machine in New York City is going to be very effective at cultivating immigrants as voters and making them loyal to the party. That's going to include Catholics, Jews, people that are Italian and Irish and, folks like that. They're all going to be generally supportive of the Democratic Party. The Democrats are also going to be more popular with factory workers, the poor, working class, folks that tend to be more pro-union tended also to vote Democrat. And you also had a lot of farmers. And when you see here most farmers, we're talking about obviously in the South, but also in the West. Northeastern, northern farmers, not as likely to vote Democrat, but certainly in the South and certainly in the West. Now, on the Republican side, you can see an interesting coalition as well. When you're talking about, once again, the impact of the Civil War, Northerners are going to be generally voting Republican. And keep in mind that, this is still, going back to the days of the Federalists and the Whigs, the Republican Party is still the party of business owners. This is the party that's in support of tariffs and things like that. So, the more modern industrialists are going to be typically supporters of the Republican Party. So, Northern whites, very pro-business, but it's going to be an interesting coalition alongside African Americans. Black African Americans in the North that can vote are going to be overwhelmingly supportive of the Republican Party. Once again, makes sense. It's the party of Lincoln. It's the party of emancipation. But at the same time, as it's, embracing African Americans as part of their voter base, it's also the nativist block of voters at the time period. These are, typically Protestant, WASPy. These are folks that, are not in favor of all these Catholics and Jews and immigrants coming to the United States and flooding into the major urban areas. Republicans, view themselves as small town American voters, which is overwhelmingly Protestant, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly, born in the United States. And you also see most of the emerging middle class that's going to be found in America also tending to vote with the Republicans. So you see these two very interesting coalitions of base of voting support, which is going to lead to very competitive elections during this time period. Now, be aware of some other important trends politically. We've already talked about how, in terms of the role of government, it was very limited at this time period. We looked at the role of the government is to make sure the mail is delivered properly, make sure you maintain national defense, make sure that, you are collecting tariffs and federal taxes, on excise taxes and stuff like that. Something that did change, though, during this time period since the Civil War ended was that following the end of the Civil War, there was a lot of money that was dedicated to a Civil War Veterans Pension Fund. This obviously makes a lot of sense if you, are Congress, which is now overwhelmingly dominated by folks that, were veterans of the Union Army. There was a sense that, you wanted to be compensated for your sacrifice. So Union veterans, Confederate veterans got nothing, but Union veterans are going to be receiving a pension, and that's going to be a very important political issue as we go through this time period. There's a question of most Americans wanting small government and low taxes, but at the same time, though, a lot of folks wanting that, wanting their pension for being a veteran. So that does create a little bit of conflict. But compared to what it is today, it's not even remotely close. This is an unbelievably small federal government compared to today. It was small, had limited responsibility, therefore needed far less money to operate. The federal government had a very limited role in people's daily lives. At the same time, this, of course, this is also the golden age of patronage. As we talk about in class, the awarding of federal jobs to friends and party loyalists and all that kind of stuff. The reality is that the party machine apparatus at the national level for both the Republicans and the Democrats, especially the Republicans, was so profound that this is really kind of a dead era of presidents in terms of powerful, famous, well-known presidents. Yes, you had Grant, but Grant was a pretty weak president. And then a lot of these other presidents of the era, people like Hayes and Garfield and Arthur and Ben Harrison and Grover Cleveland stands out a little bit more than some of the others. But, for the most part, these are very forgettable presidents because this is still a time where Congress is going to have more power than the White House typically. And the party bosses that controlled the respective delegations or caucuses of their parties really are going to be the dominant figures. For example, Senator Roscoe Conkling out of New York, he is going to be a major, major player in pretty much owning the Republican Party for several years. And it's really going to be him behind the scenes in many cases telling presidents, people like Grant and Hayes and, whatnot, trying to basically tell them, here's who you should be appointing for these federal jobs. These are the folks that are loyal to the Republican Party and also, in reality, loyal to him. So, once again, keep in mind, this is a presidency that is limited in power, much more so than compared to today. And we see this is the golden age of machine politics. And, of course, its impact on patronage. All right. So that then brings us into the interesting election of 1880. And in 1880, we see a battle take place within the party itself. There's a little bit of a civil war going on here. And a lot of it has to deal with the issue of patronage and corruption in government. Now, those that were outwardly supportive of ending patronage and instituting civil service reform, in other words, providing jobs based on objective testing and merit and things like that, those folks were known as the half-breeds, led by Maine Senator James Blaine. You can always remember where Blaine was from. It rhymes with Maine. They're going to be in opposition to what was known as the Stalwart faction, which was led by Senator Roscoe Conkling that we just mentioned a moment ago. The Stalwarts were, pretty much unapologetically supportive of patronage. The idea is that loyal party members should be rewarded with, federal jobs whenever possible. And they would make comments about the half-breeds and their support of civil service by calling it snivel service and, basically saying that these are not true loyal Republicans. Now, here's the funny part about the half-breeds is that most of the half-breed rhetoric was really just that, rhetoric. Behind the scenes, many of the half-breed Republicans were just as politically corrupt and supporters of patronage as the Stalwarts were. It's just that, the Stalwarts were just much more open about it. But still, though, these were two major factions of the Republican Party, and there was fear in 1880 that they might see their party rip apart. And so a compromise deal is going to be done where Ohio Congressman James Garfield is going to be nominated for president, and longtime party crony, stooge, some have said, of Roscoe Conkling out of New York City will be Chester A. Arthur. So the Garfield-Arthur ticket is what the Republicans are going to be running on in 1880. And we'll leave it there for right now. So when we come back, we'll talk about how patronage and civil service will certainly come to the forefront in the early 1880s. We'll see you next time.